This is Business Incorporated, and we welcome our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. On the show this Monday, North Africa's largest economy looks to $10 billion new investments in its oil and gas sector in 2018 and 2019. Nigeria's Stanbic IBTC posts positive first quarter profit that soft lands with 1.5 billion naira right back, and Air France says some 25% of its scheduled flights will be affected today as workers' strike enters the 10th day. I am boosting Omofaye in Lagos, and let's get the show started. Trading, some of the trading day, beginning with the African continent. Let's start with Nigeria, where the oil share index started Monday in the red, down about 0.14%, is still looking for direction at lunchtime. In South Africa, the broad GSC index was 0.06% positive, but the much bigger market and a bigger gain today, the Egyptian EGX 30 rallying around 1%. Both markets, South Africa and Egypt, sidestepping Nigeria as we start the new trading week, taking us to the final days of April. In East Africa, the Nairobi Stock Exchange finished last week by 0.52% lower. Let's move the needle to the Middle East, where the new week is looking decent at intraday Monday, with the exception of the Dubai financial market down about 0.5%. The Abu Dhabi, the stock index was 0.23% higher, while the Qatar exchange was up a little, 0.02% around midday Nigerian time. In Saudi Arabia, the Tadawul stock index, the TSI, was rallying about 0.25% intraday on Monday. And those are some of the numbers there for you about an hour and a half ago, if you're tracking the markets with us here on the program. Meantime, the strike action by Air France workers entered its 10th day on Monday, with the airline announcing some 225% of its flights would be cancelled. That will be several hundreds of flights if you look at the size of this airline. So let's start our European trading day for the week now with Conrad Bussen, a DWTV financial correspondent for Channel Television, standing by the Deutsche Börse in Frankfurt. Conrad, it's good to get together again. Let's get the show started. What is the future of Europe as France President Macron meets his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, while a new trade deal has just been inked between Mexico and Brussels?
Yes, Bosun, very interesting timing, isn't it, that Emmanuel Macron would travel to see Donald Trump in Washington, and only a few days before, just over the weekend, the European Union struck a deal with Mexico, a preliminary deal to create a new trade pact between the European Union and Mexico. And let's not forget, also our German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, will be traveling to Washington at the end of this week. This really looks like concerted action, like the Europeans trying to find some common ground with the US administration, want to show at the same time that they can do business in terms of free trade without the United States. This trade deal now between the European Union and Mexico is meant to replace a 21-year-old trade deal with the Mexicans, which largely was about industrial goods. Now this new deal is also about services more, and it will also include lots of foodstuffs, agricultural goods. Of course, a lot of details will still have to be sorted out. For example, one question is what to do with the cheese called manchego. It's a Spanish cheese here in Europe, only made of sheep milk cheese coming from central Spain, is allowed to be called manchego. The Mexicans have their own manchego, and they make it with cow's milk. This has to be sorted out.
Quite a lot about trade there. It's when you have trade wars, you begin to hear of so many products perhaps you never thought on your breakfast, lunch, or dinner table, Conrad. But we'll compare those menu, what we eat on a daily basis later. But let's look at Air France. In our stormy weather, to Deutsche Bank and the UBS numbers, a raft of corporate earnings on tap as we speak. Tell us about some sweet and others not so sweet market or corporate news that the market and investors are looking at the moment. Okay. Okay, Conrad, let's just get back to our we lost the connection there. My question was about the number of corporate earnings today in Europe. Air France, as you heard earlier, is reporting 25% of its flights will be cancelled. That will be hundreds of flights, as you may expect. The workers are on a 10-day strike, and Air France is looking at some of its problems, just as its main rival, Lufthansa, had a few weeks ago. One of the other stories as we look at the European markets today is the PMI numbers out of Germany and the Eurozone. This will be part of the conversations for markets and investors as we continue the trading day. But let's move on quickly and look at the U.S. market. And right now, it's still early hours. It's not yet the opening bell on Wall Street. That'll be about 2:30 Nigerian time. The pre-open numbers of the U.S. stock futures, nearly all the three main indices were trading little change as investors and traders see yields on U.S. 10-year treasuries hitting 3% as interest rates are staying higher by the Fed. Heavyweight Dow Industrials futures rose 2 points, indicating a gain of 1.06 points ahead of the open. The tech-savvy Nasdaq 100 futures and the S&P 500 indicating a relatively flat start on the bond side. The 10-year is now around 3%. Let's get back to the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Conrad is back now. Conrad, sorry, we apologize for that very bit of a tech hitch there a little bit. If you can hear me. Now, let's talk about the Air France in stormy weather and the Deutsche Bank on the one hand and UBS numbers for first quarter 2018. These are some sweet, some not so sweet corporate news. Talk to us through how the markets and investors are looking at some of this headline news from some of the big companies in Europe and in the US.
Well, the strikes in France are of course a very big topic. Air France, the 9th day of strike there. Some people here are bad-mouthing the French President Emmanuel Macron. They say it's easier for him to travel to Washington and talk to the American president, who's definitely difficult to talk with, instead of, staying back in his own country, Emmanuel Macron, trying to sort out the problems at Air France, and even more so, the strikes at the French railway company are a big topic. This is even more difficult and dangerous in terms of French politics. The strikes at the SNCF, the Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer. This is the French national railway company. The people working for the railways in France are really highly privileged, and Emmanuel Macron wants to take those privileges away from the workers and employees of SNCF, and it looks like they want not only to go on strike, but to really fight for their privileges. Newspapers in France today report that the strikes at the railway company might be prolonged over the summer holidays, les grandes vacances, the big holidays in France. That would be a catastrophe for France, as the country is so dependent on international tourism. You mentioned Deutsche Bank. Well, UBS came out with its earnings report, which didn't manage to convince investors, and that of course raises questions about Deutsche Bank, which will come out with its earnings report this Thursday. And meanwhile, the large Chinese shareholder of Deutsche Bank, HNA, announced that it reduced its stake in Deutsche Bank from around about 9% to 8%. And that of course raises questions about the sustainability of this investment, whether or not Deutsche Bank can really rely on this important shareholder.
Thank you very much. Let's leave it there for today. I hope to get together sometime in the future. Conrad Bunsen, the DWTV financial correspondent for Channels Television out of the Frankfurt Stock Exchange.